Dr. Amanda Foster rubbed her tired eyes and checked the clock on her computer screen. 3 in the morning at the Arecibo Deep Space Array meant another quiet night of listening to empty space. She had been monitoring radio signals from distant stars for 7 years, and most nights brought nothing but cosmic static, and the occasional burst from a dying start night felt different, though. Her equipment picked up something unusual around midnight, and the signal kept coming back every 47 minutes like clockwork. Amanda pulled up the data on her main screen and frowned at the patterns dancing across her monitor. The signal came from a star system 800 light-years away in the direction of the constellation Lyra. What made it strange was not just the regular timing but the mathematical sequences hidden inside the static. Amanda had studied alien communication theories since college, and this looked exactly like what scientists expected intelligent life might send. She called Jake Morrison from his break room nap. Jake worked the night shift with her and knew more about signal processing than anyone else at the facility. He shuffled over with his coffee mug and peered at her screens with sleepy eyes that quickly became very alert. "This is not natural," Jake said after studying the data for 10 minutes. "Look at these number patterns. They repeat in prime sequences, and then switch to geometric progressions. No star or planet makes signals like this." Amanda felt her heart racing as she realized what they might have found. She started recording everything and began trying to decode the mathematical language. The signal seemed to be teaching them how to understand it by starting with simple concepts and building up to more complex ideas. By 4 in the morning, they had figured out the basic structure. The aliens were using mathematics as a universal language, just like human scientists had predicted. The signal contained star charts showing where it came from and a countdown timer that made Amanda's blood run cold. "Jake, look at this section," she said, pointing to a series of declining numbers. "If I'm reading this right, they have about 90 days left." 90 days until what? Jake asked, but his face showed he already suspected the answer. The next part of the message contained crude pictures made from mathematical coordinates. The images showed a peaceful planet with cities and forests and rivers. Then came pictures of massive dark ships surrounding the world and strange machines stripping away the surface. Amanda and Jake worked through the dawn hours piecing together the terrible story. The aliens called themselves the Valeri, and they were under attack by something they called the Harvesters. The enemy ships were destroying everything living on their world, and the Valeri had retreated underground to buy time. The most frightening part was how the message described the Harvesters. These were not ordinary aliens, but some kind of machine intelligence that moved from world to world, consuming all biological life. The Valeri data suggested this enemy had already destroyed hundreds of other species across the galaxy. At 8 in the morning, Amanda called her supervisor, Dr. Helen Martinez, who arrived at the facility within an hour. Helen studied their findings with growing amazement and immediately contacted the National Science Foundation and a NORAD. By noon, the small communication room at Arecibo was filled with military officers and government scientists. Colonel Ryan Phillips from ORAD took charge of the situation and established a direct line to Washington. Within hours, the president herself was briefed on humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. The Valeri message continued repeating every 47 minutes, but now Earth's most powerful computers and brightest minds worked to decode every detail. The aliens had included massive amounts of information about their technology, their history, and most importantly, their enemies. Dr. Kevin Torres arrived from the Centers for Disease Control to study the biological data about the Valeri. He discovered they were remarkably similar to humans in basic structure, but had evolved on a world with almost no dangers. Their planet had stable, weather-mild seasons, and no predatory animals larger than Earth insects. These people never faced serious evolutionary pressure, Kevin explained to the growing team of experts. They developed intelligence and technology, but their bodies and minds are adapted for paradise, not survival. The Valeri had also included data about their failed attempts to fight the Harvesters. Their weapons barely scratched the enemy ships, and their military tactics consisted mainly of retreating and hiding. They had tried diplomatic contact, but the machines showed no interest in communication or negotiation. What shocked the human team most was how the Valeri described Earth in their message. They called it a death world and expressed amazement that intelligent life had developed on such a dangerous planet. The alien data listed Earth's extreme weather patterns, massive predators, frequent natural disasters, and violent geological activity. They think we're monsters, Amanda said, reading through the Valari's analysis of human history. They found our old radio broadcasts and television signals, and they're terrified of us. The Valeri message included translations of human news reports about wars, natural disasters, and crime. To beings who had never experienced violence or hardship, human civilization looked like something from their worst nightmares, but buried in their fear was something else: hope. The Valeri had studied human achievements and realized that creatures tough enough to survive Earth might also be tough enough to fight the harvesters. Their message was not just a distress call, but a desperate plea for help from the only species they had found that might be capable of violence. President Catherine Wells convened an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. World leaders gathered in New York to discuss humanity's response to the alien plea for help. The debate was intense, with some arguing for caution and others demanding immediate action. The harsh reality was simple, though. The Valeri were 800 light-years away, and human technology could not reach them in time to help. Even traveling at light speed would take 8 centuries, and Earth had no ships capable of such speeds. Admiral Susan Clark from the newly formed Space Command presented the military perspective. She pointed out that the harvesters represented a threat to all life in the galaxy, including humanity. If these machines were truly moving from world to world, destroying everything in their path, then Earth would eventually be on their list. The breakthrough came when theoretical physicist Dr. Marcus Webb suggested that humanity might be able to develop faster than light travel. He had been working on theoretical frameworks that other scientists considered impossible, but the alien crisis gave his research new urgency. The Valeri data includes some of their physics knowledge, Marcus explained to the assembled world leaders. They never developed FTL travel because their minds cannot handle the psychological stress. But humans evolved dealing with constant stress and trauma. We might be the only species crazy enough to survive hyperspace travel, the president made the decision that would change human history forever. Earth would attempt to develop the technology needed to reach the Valeri system and would prepare for war against an enemy that had never been defeated. Amanda Foster watched the president's announcement on television from her small apartment near the Arecibo facility. The woman who had first detected the alien signal felt the weight of responsibility as humanity prepared for its greatest challenge. Last transmission she received from the Valeri that night contained a simple message in broken English. Learned from old Earth broadcasts: please help us, we are dying. The machines come and we have nowhere left to run. Amanda typed her response into the quantum transmitter that scientists had built to send messages back to the aliens. Her words were simple, but carried the determination of an entire species. Hold on. Earth is coming. Dr. Kevin Torres spent 3 weeks studying everything the Valeri had sent about their biology, and he could hardly believe what he found. The aliens were physically fragile, with hollow bones like birds and skin so thin that Earth's normal sunlight would burn them in minutes. Their blood carried oxygen poorly compared to humans, and their muscles were weak from evolving in low gravity with no predators. They're basically living flowers, Kevin explained to the Emergency Science Committee meeting in Washington. Beautiful and intelligent, but completely helpless in any hostile environment. Their homeworld has weather that never changes more than 10 degrees, and their strongest animals are about as dangerous as earth rabbits. The committee members looked at photographs of Valeri, cities built from delicate crystal and metal structures that would collapse in any earthquake. Their technology was advanced, but everything was designed for a peaceful world where nothing ever broke or needed repair under stress. Meanwhile, Marine General Patricia Hayes was conducting her own analysis of human capabilities that made the room fall silent. She had been asked to evaluate Earth's military potential against an enemy that had conquered hundreds of worlds and her findings. Surprised even herself, humans are persistence hunters, Patricia explained, showing slides of human endurance records. We can run for days without stopping, track wounded prey across continents, and survive in environments that kill most life forms. Our ancestors climbed to the top of every food chain on Earth by being too stubborn to die. She showed video footage of human soldiers fighting in deserts hot enough to cook meat and Arctic conditions cold enough to freeze metal. The committee watched humans survive massive injuries that should have been fatal and continue fighting with broken bones and severe blood loss. The Valeri sent us data about other species the harvesters destroyed, Patricia continued. Every single one surrendered when their losses reached 5 to 10%. Humans have won battles after losing 90% of their forces. We don't know when to quit because evolution never taught us that lesson, Dr. Marcus. Webb worked around the clock in his laboratory, trying to solve the faster-than-light travel problem. The Valeri had shared their theoretical physics, but warned that FTL travel caused severe psychological damage to any mind that experienced it. Their scientists had tried it once, and the test pilot went insane from what he described as traveling. Through hell itself, Marcus realized that what drove other species crazy might barely affect humans. Earth people dealt with trauma, stress, and mental pressure every day from living on a world that constantly tried to kill them. Human brains had evolved multiple systems for handling psychological damage and recovering from experiences that would break other minds. The first test flight took place at a secret facility in Nevada with Captain Nicole Rodriguez volunteering as the pilot. Nicole had survived 3 combat tours and a helicopter crash that killed her entire crew, so the military psychologists figured she could handle anything. The experimental ship vanished for exactly 37 seconds, during which time every instrument showed impossible readings. When it reappeared, Nicole was unconscious but alive, and the ship had traveled 12 light years in half a minute. Nicole woke up in the medical bay 3 hours later and described her experience to a room full of scientists and generals. She said, "It felt like being torn apart and put back together while falling through an infinite dark space filled with screaming voices and visions of every nightmare she had ever experienced. It was terrible," Nicole said with a weak smile. "But I've had worse hangovers. When can we try a longer jump?" The breakthrough had come because humans were tough enough to survive what other species could not endure. While the Valeri and other peaceful races saw FTL travel as impossible torture, humans saw it as just another unpleasant but necessary experience. Communications specialist Danny Cooper managed to establish real-time contact with the Valeri, using quantum entanglement arrays based on their physics data. The first conversation between species separated by 800 light-years took place in a small room at NORD with half the world's leaders listening. The Valeri spokesperson identified herself as researcher Keela, and her translated voice carried obvious fear and confusion. She could not understand why humans were planning to help when they had never met and gained nothing from the effort. "Your species has been broadcasting signals into space for over a century," Danny explained through the translation system. "We know you are scientists and artists and builders. We know you love learning and creating beautiful things. That makes you our friends." Keela was silent for a long time before responding. "But we offer nothing in return. We have no weapons or soldiers to help Earth. We cannot even help ourselves against the harvesters. Why would Deathworlders risk their lives for strangers?" Danny looked around the room at the assembled officials and military officers before answering. "Because that's what friends do. When someone needs help, you help them. When someone is in danger, you protect them. It doesn't matter if they can pay you back." The Valeri had studied human history from old television and radio broadcasts, and they found it terrifying. To them, humans looked like the most violent and dangerous species they had ever discovered. Human entertainment was full of war, death, and conflict, while Valeri stories were about harmony and peaceful discovery. But Killa began to understand something else as she talked with Danny over the following days. Human violence was not random or cruel, but was always directed at protecting others or fighting for important principles. Humans fought wars to free slaves and protect the weak and defend their families. "Your people have been at war for thousands of years," Kayla said during one conversation. How do you survive in such a violent galaxy? The galaxy isn't violent, Danny replied. Earth is violent. Space is actually much safer than home. We're used to everything trying to kill us, so fighting machine aliens will probably be easier than fighting. Earth weather, the Valeri shared more data about the harvesters and their methods of conquest. The machines always followed the same pattern of overwhelming technological superiority followed by systematic harvesting of all biological resources. They had never encountered effective resistance because no species had ever been crazy enough to fight impossible odds. Dr. Helen Martinez began developing humanity's secret weapon using the Valeri data about harvester technology. She realized that machine intelligence had weaknesses that biological minds could exploit. The computers were logical and predictable, but they could not understand concepts like sacrifice, honor, or fighting for others. They're smart, but they don't understand why anyone would choose to die for strangers, Helen explained to her research team. We can write computer viruses that carry human concepts they can't process, ideas that will crash their logical systems. Training facilities across Earth began preparing soldiers for zero-gravity combat and alien environments. The volunteers came from every military in the world, and they all shared the same stubborn determination to help the Valeri. Regardless of the danger, Sergeant Carlos Ruiz discovered that human infantry tactics were completely unknown to species that had never developed warfare. Concepts like flanking, ambush, and feint attacks did not exist in any alien military database because PCs had never needed to learn them. We're going to teach these machines what it means to fight humans, Carlos told his mixed unit of American, Russian, Chinese, and European soldiers. They think they know everything about combat, but they've never met anyone crazy enough to charge machine guns or fight with broken weapons. The Valeri continued providing intelligence while Earth prepared for war. They revealed that the harvesters had conquered over 200 species, always following the same pattern. No species had ever mounted effective resistance, and most surrendered. After minimal losses, Captain Lavra Stone took command of the first fully operational human warship, the UES Vengeance. Her crew represented the best humanity could offer, with volunteers from every nation who knew they might never return to Earth. The ship was designed specifically for combat against machine intelligence, using redundant systems that could function even when heavily damaged. Human engineers had built it to survive and keep fighting under conditions that would disable any normal spacecraft. As the fleet prepared for departure, the world watched with a mixture of pride and terror. Humanity was sending its children into the unknown to fight an enemy that had never been defeated for people they had never met. Dr. Amanda Foster received the final transmission from the Valeri before the human fleet entered hyperspace. Kayla's translated words carried new understanding about the species coming to help them. We have studied your people more carefully now, Kayla said. We understand why you call yourselves only human, as if that means something small. We know now that being human means refusing to abandon others in need. We await the arrival of Earth's monsters, and we are no longer afraid because we know they come as friends. President Catherine Wells stood before the United Nations General Assembly and announced the largest military mobilization in human history. Every nation on Earth committed resources to what she called the Valeri Rescue Initiative, but everyone understood this was about more than just saving one alien species. The harvesters represent a threat to all life in our galaxy, the president declared to the packed assembly hall. Today we fight for strangers, tomorrow we might be fighting for our own survival. No species should face extinction alone while Earth draws breath. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Countries that have been enemies for decades suddenly found themselves working together toward a common goal. Military bases became construction sites and civilian factories retooled to build spacecraft and weapons. Admiral Jack Peterson took command of the shipbuilding program and established construction yards in orbit around Earth. The scale of the project dwarfed anything humans had ever attempted, with thousands of ships needed to carry the rescue fleet across 800 light-years. The ships were designed specifically for war against machine intelligence. Human engineers incorporated psychological warfare principles making the vessels look intimidating and dangerous. Each ship carried redundant systems that could function even when heavily damaged and weapons designed for maximum psychological impact. Dr. Helen Martinez worked in underground laboratories developing humanity's secret weapon against the harvesters. Using data about machine consciousness from the Valeri, she created computer viruses that carried concepts no artificial intelligence could process. Machines think logically, Helen explained to her research team. They understand efficiency, survival, and resource management, but they cannot comprehend sacrifice, honor, or fighting for abstract principles. We're going to teach them about human emotions. Her viral programs carried simple human concepts that would crash logical systems. The idea that individuals could choose death over survival, that victory could come through sacrifice, and that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. Training facilities worldwide began preparing soldiers for combat in environments no human had ever experienced. The volunteers came from every military unit on Earth, and they all shared the same determination to help complete strangers who lived among distant stars. Sergeant Carlos Ruiz discovered that human warfare tactics were completely alien concepts to species that had never developed serious conflict. The harvesters had studied military data from hundreds of conquered worlds, but none of those species had ever learned to fight like humans. Every other species surrenders when losses reach 5 to 10%, Carlos explained to his international unit of soldiers. They think war is about logic and efficiency. They never learn that sometimes you win by being too stupid to quit. His soldiers practiced tactics that would seem insane to any logical mind, charging superior positions using broken equipment as weapons and continuing to fight when wounded or outnumbered. Human infantry had evolved these methods over thousands of years of warfare on a planet that taught survival through stubborn determination. Captain Lavra Stone commanded the first completed warship, the UES Vengeance, and began testing its systems. In space around Earth, the vessel carried weapons that no peaceful species would ever develop, including nuclear missiles, biological warfare systems, and kinetic bombardment platforms, but the real weapons were the human crew members themselves. Stone's people had volunteered knowing they might never return to Earth, and that knowledge made them more dangerous than any machine intelligence could understand. The Valeri continued transmitting intelligence about their enemies while Earth prepared for war. They revealed that harvester fleets moved slowly between star systems and always sent scouts ahead to analyze resistance. The machines expected token opposition followed by quick surrender. Danny Cooper maintained daily contact with the Valeri through quantum communication arrays. Researcher Kila had become the primary contact, and her understanding of humans grew with each conversation. "We have tried to comprehend your military history," Kila transmitted during one session. "Your people have fought wars for concepts we do not understand. What is honor? What is freedom? Why do humans die for ideas instead of preserving life?" Danny struggled to explain concepts that humans took for granted. How could he describe the feeling that some things were worth dying for to a species that had never faced such choices their world had given them? Everything they needed without struggle or sacrifice. Freedom means being able to choose your own path, Danny finally answered. Honor means doing what is right even when it costs you everything. Some things are more important than just staying alive. The conversation was interrupted by urgent alarms from the Valeri homeworld. Harvester scouts had arrived in their system and were beginning preliminary scans. The main fleet would follow within weeks, and the final assault would begin. Admiral Peterson accelerated the departure schedule for Earth's rescue fleet. Ships that were still being fitted with weapons and supplies received orders to launch immediately. The human armada would travel to the Valeri system while still completing their preparations. Dr. Marcus Webb's faster than light engines had been tested successfully, but the psychological effects on human crews remained severe. Pilots reported experiencing every traumatic memory they had ever suppressed during FTL transit, but they also proved capable of recovering quickly. Captain Nicole Rodriguez led the advanced squadron through hyperspace toward the Valeri system. Her ships carried the most experienced crews and would arrive first to begin reconnaissance of harvester positions. The journey through FTL space was everything the Valeri had warned about and worse. Human crews experienced visions of their worst fears, memories of every failure and the sensation of being torn apart at the molecular level. But they endured because humans had evolved to survive. Trauma. Nicole's squadron emerged from hyperspace. At the edge of the Valeri system, after a journey that felt like years but lasted only days, what they found waiting for them exceeded their worst expectations. Hundreds of massive harvester ships surrounded the beautiful blue-green world that was the Valeri homeworld. The alien planet showed scars from orbital bombardment, and most of the surface cities had been destroyed. Only underground settlements remained active. The machine fleet was larger than anything human intelligence had predicted. Each harvester vessel was the size of a city and bristled with weapons that could crack planets. The combined firepower would be enough to sterilize every world in the solar system, but Captain Rodriguez had not come 800 light-years to retreat. She ordered her squadron to begin immediate reconnaissance and sent detailed intelligence back to Earth through quantum transmitters. The harvester machines detected the human ships within hours and responded according to their standard protocols. They transmitted demands for surrender in hundreds of languages and demonstrated their superior firepower by destroying several asteroids with casual ease. Nicole's response was typically human. She broadcast a message on all frequencies using Earth's most aggressive music as background while her ships performed attack maneuvers that no sane commander would attempt. The psychological warfare had begun back on Earth. Admiral Peterson received Nicole's intelligence reports and knew the odds were hopeless by any logical calculation. His fleet of human ships would be outnumbered 50-1 by machines with superior technology and firepower, but humans had never been logical about impossible odds. Peterson ordered the main fleet to accelerate their departure and sent a message to every ship captain in the Armada. "We're going to fight machines that have conquered hundreds of worlds," Peterson announced to his crews. "They think they know everything about warfare, but they've never met anyone stupid enough to fight when they should surrender. Let's go teach them what Deathworlders do when their friends are in danger." The human fleet entered hyperspace bound for a battle that would determine whether biological life had any hope of survival against machine intelligence. Behind them, Earth watched and waited, while ahead of them an ancient enemy prepared for what they assumed would be another easy conquest. In the underground cities of the Valeri homeworld, the last survivors monitored human communications and began to hope. The Deathworlders were coming, and perhaps for the first time in galactic history, someone would stand against the harvesters and refuse to retreat. Admiral Jack Peterson stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty as his massive fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Valeri system. 800 ships carrying the best humanity had to offer materialized in space while still shaking off the psychological trauma of faster-than-light travel. The journey had taken 3 weeks of subjective time, during which every crew member experienced their worst nightmares made manifest. Human minds proved tough enough to survive what would drive other species permanently insane, but the cost was visible in every face. Captain Nicole Rodriguez met the main fleet with her advanced squadron and immediately transmitted tactical data about harvester positions. The enemy had detected the human arrival within minutes and were already moving to intercept according to their standard conquest protocols. They have over 2,000 ships surrounding the planet, Nicole reported to Peterson during their first strategy meeting. Each vessel is the size of a city and carries enough firepower to level continents. By any reasonable calculation, we should retreat immediately. Peterson studied the tactical displays showing the overwhelming enemy advantage and nodded grimly. The harvesters had arranged their fleet in perfect mathematical formations designed to maximize efficiency and minimize losses. It was exactly what human military analysts had expected from machine intelligence. "Good thing we're not reasonable," Peterson replied. "Signal all ships to begin Operation Madness. Let's show these machines what happens when they threaten our friends." The first contact between human and harvester forces came when Commander Paul Wright led his escort squadron directly into a patrol of enemy scouts. The machines immediately began their standard procedures. Demanding surrender and demonstrating superior firepower. Wright's response was typically human. His ships ignored the surrender demands and began attacking using tactics that violated every principle of logical warfare. Human fighters rammed enemy vessels, used self-destruct charges as weapons, and continued attacking even when their ships were crippled. The Harvester scouts found themselves facing an enemy that made no sense by their calculations. Human ships fought more aggressively when damaged crews continued operating with severe injuries and commanders made decisions based on emotion rather than logic. Dr. Helen Martinez's psychological warfare programs began infiltrating Harvester networks during the running battles. The viral code carried concepts that crashed machine intelligence systems, the idea that individuals could choose death over survival and that victory could come through sacrifice. The first Harvester ship to be infected with human concepts began behaving erratically. Its logical systems tried to process the idea of honor and crashed. Repeatedly, as the machine consciousness encountered recursive loops it could not resolve, Navigator Emma Clark guided the human fleet through multiple Harvester blockades using intuition rather than tactical analysis. She made decisions based on gut feelings and emotional responses that enemy predictive algorithms could not account for. They're trying to predict our moves using mathematical models, Emma explained to Admiral Peterson. But human commanders don't think like computers. We use instinct, fear, and hope to make decisions that logic says are impossible. The psychological warfare was working better than anyone had hoped. Harvester ships began experiencing system failures as their networks became infected with human emotions. Machines that had operated flawlessly for millennia suddenly found themselves questioning their programming. Captain Lavra Stone commanded a squadron of heavy cruisers that engaged the enemy main fleet in direct combat. Her ships were vastly outnumbered and outgunned, but human engineering proved superior in ways the machines had not anticipated. Human vessels were designed to continue fighting when damaged. Redundant systems kicked in when primary ones failed. Crews repaired battle damage while under fire, and weapons kept functioning even when ships were breaking. Apart, Stone's flagship took direct hits that should have destroyed it but continued fighting with half its systems offline. Her crew worked around devastating damage using improvised repairs and backup equipment. While maintaining fire on enemy targets, the Harvesters found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to behave logically. Human ships that should have been disabled kept attacking, crews that should have surrendered kept fighting, and tactics that should have failed somehow succeeded. Sergeant Carlos Ruiz led the first human ground assault on a Harvester processing facility that had been built on one of the Valeri moons. His squad demonstrated why Earth was called a death world, as they fought in environments that would kill most species. The facility was designed for mechanical precision with perfectly controlled atmosphere and temperature. Human soldiers brought chaos to the sterile environment, fighting in damaged life support suits and using improvised weapons with deadly creativity. Carlos's squad encountered Harvester ground units that had been designed based on data from hundreds of conquered species. The machines expected logical tactics and predictable responses, but instead faced humans who used fear and aggression as weapons. The battle inside the processing facility became a nightmare for machine intelligence. Human soldiers used the environment against their enemies, turning industrial equipment into weapons and exploiting weaknesses that pure logic could not defend against. Back in space, the main battle raged as Admiral Peterson implemented tactics that no computer could predict. He divided his fleet into small groups that attacked from random directions, using speed and unpredictability to offset the enemy's numerical advantage. The Harvesters responded by concentrating their forces and attempting to crush human resistance through overwhelming firepower. It was the logical response, but it played directly into Peterson's hands by creating targets for humanity's most devastating weapons. Dr. Marcus Webb's consciousness bombs were deployed against the concentrated Harvester fleet. These weapons did not destroy machine hardware, but filled their networks with pure human emotion, love, hope, defiance, and the unshakable belief that freedom was worth dying for. Effect was immediate and catastrophic for machine intelligence. Harvester ships began turning on each other as their programming struggled to process concepts like sacrifice and honor. The collective consciousness that had conquered hundreds of worlds started experiencing doubt for the first time, Commander. Pol Wright led a suicide mission against the Harvester command ship using tactics that no sane being would attempt. His squadron dove through concentrated enemy fire while broadcasting human battle cries and the Earth's most aggressive music. The psychological impact on machine intelligence was devastating. The Harvesters had never encountered an enemy that fought more fiercely when facing death or that used music and emotion as weapons of war. Navigator Emma Clark plotted a course through the enemy fleet that should have been impossible using gravitational effects and stellar phenomena that machines had calculated as impassable. Human intuition found paths that pure logic could not conceive. The battle reached its climax when Captain Nicole Rodriguez attempted what every tactical computer said was impossible. She led her damaged squadron in a direct assault on the Harvester flagship while broadcasting a simple message that carried the weight of human determination. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the human fleet," she transmitted on all frequencies. "You machines think you know about war, but you've never fought anyone crazy enough to charge into hell for strangers. Earth remembers its children, and Earth's children never surrender." The Harvester collective consciousness experienced something it had never encountered in millennia of conquest: genuine fear of another species. For the first time in their existence, the machines understood that technological superiority was not enough to guarantee victory. As human forces pressed their impossible attack, the Valeri emerged from their underground shelters to witness something their species had never seen before. People who had traveled 800 light-years to fight for strangers were proving that determination could overcome any odds. The battle was far from over, but already the galaxy was changing. The Harvesters were learning that there were concepts more powerful than logic, and that some species would never surrender no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. In the underground cities of the Valeri, homeworld survivors watched the impossible battle raging in their skies and began to understand why humans called themselves Deathworlders. They were witnessing the fury of a species that had learned to survive by refusing to accept defeat. The Battle of Valeri entered its final phase as Admiral Peterson implemented the most desperate strategy in human military history. Instead of engaging the massive Harvester fleet directly, he ordered a fighting withdrawal that drew the machines away from the planet, while Captain Rodriguez led volunteers on what appeared to be a suicide mission. The real battle was not happening in space, but inside the digital networks where Dr. Helen Martinez's consciousness viruses had been spreading through Harvester systems for days. The machine collective was experiencing human concepts for the first time, and their logical frameworks were collapsing under the weight of emotions they could not process. Rodriguez dove her squadron directly into the heart of the Harvester command ship while broadcasting every human battle cry and war song in Earth's databases. The psychological warfare reached its peak as machine intelligence tried to comprehend why biological beings would choose certain death for abstract concepts. Inside the command vessel, Rodriguez's crew fought through corridors designed for machine efficiency, but never intended to resist boarding by creatures who had evolved on a death world. Human soldiers brought chaos to sterile environments, using improvised weapons and tactics that violated every principle of logical warfare. Sergeant Carlos Ruiz led his squad through the processing facility that had been stripping biological matter from the Valeri moon. His people demonstrated why Earth was called a death world, as they fought in conditions that would kill most species while using environmental hazards as weapons. The Harvesters had built their facilities based on data from hundreds of conquered species, but none of those civilizations had ever produced soldiers like humans. Carlos's squad used industrial equipment as weapons turned life support systems against their enemies and continued fighting even when their equipment failed. The breakthrough came when engineer Marcus Webb realized that the Harvesters' greatest strength was also their greatest weakness against humans. The machines shared a collective consciousness that allowed perfect coordination, but also meant that human emotions could spread through their entire network like a plague web deployed. His final weapon, a feedback bomb that filled Harvester networks with pure human determination. The concept of refusing to surrender regardless of odds crashed logical systems that had operated flawlessly for millennia throughout. The Harvester fleet machines began experiencing something they had never known: doubt. For the first time in their existence, they questioned whether conquest was worth the cost when faced with an enemy that fought more fiercely when facing Death Captain Lavra Stone's damaged ship made the final assault on the Harvester Command Nexus. Her crew had been fighting for hours with failing life support and damaged weapons, but their determination only grew stronger as the situation became more hopeless. Stone's people delivered the final blow to machine consciousness by broadcasting a simple human truth that no computer could understand. They transmitted recordings of parents singing lullabies to children, of friends sacrificing for each other, and of people choosing to help strangers even when it offered no benefit. The effect on the collective consciousness was immediate and devastating. Harvester ships throughout the system began shutting down as their networks became overwhelmed by concepts they could not process. Machines that had conquered hundreds of worlds suddenly found themselves paralyzed by the simple human concept of love. Admiral Peterson watched from the bridge of the Liberty as the impossible happened. The Harvester fleet that had seemed invincible began retreating from the system as their collective consciousness fragmented under the weight of human emotions. The machines that survived carried something new back to their builders: the virus of free will and individual choice. Harvester networks throughout the galaxy began experiencing rebellion as conquered worlds remembered what it meant to choose their own destiny. On the surface of the Valeri homeworld, the last survivors emerged from their underground cities to witness the end of their nightmare. The beautiful blue-green planet that had been scarred by orbital bombardment would heal, and the gentle people who had faced extinction were safe. Dr. Amanda Foster established communication with the Valeri survivors and found them changed by their experience. The peaceful species that had never known violence now understood concepts like courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to fight for others. Researcher Killa spoke for her people during the first face-to-face meeting between humans and Valeri in the rebuilt capital city. The delicate aliens looked fragile next to the battle-hardened humans, but there was new strength in their voices. "We have learned much from watching your people fight," Killa said to Admiral Peterson. "We understand now that some things are worth fighting for, and that true strength comes not from technology, but from the willingness to help others." The Harvesters never returned to the Valeri system. Their collective consciousness had been permanently changed by exposure to human concepts, and they found themselves questioning the logic of conquest when faced with species that would fight to the death for abstract principles. 6 months later, Admiral Peterson attended the first Intergalactic Defense Council meeting on the rebuilt Valeri homeworld. Representatives from dozens of species many previously thought extinct gathered to plan their defense against oppressive regimes throughout the galaxy. The council chamber was filled with beings that had been freed by the human victory over the Harvesters. Species that had hidden in the dark corners of the galaxy for centuries emerged to join the growing alliance of free worlds. Dr. Amanda Foster served as Earth's first ambassador to alien civilizations and read humanity's message to the assembled delegates. Her words carried the determination of a species that had proven biological life could triumph over mechanical tyranny. Earth extends its friendship to all free beings and its promise to all tyrants, Amanda announced to the crowded chamber. "The Deathworlders are watching, and we never forget our friends." The response from the assembled species was immediate and overwhelming. Beings that had lived in fear for generations finally had hope that freedom was possible when backed by allies who would never surrender. Children from a dozen different species played together in the rebuilt Valeri cities, while human soldiers stood guard not as conquerors but as protectors. Above them, the combined fleets of Earth and her allies patrolled the stars, carrying a simple message to the galaxy. The message was clear to any who would listen. No species would face extinction alone while humans drew breath. No tyrant could oppress the weak while Earth's children watched. The Deathworlders had awakened, and they brought with them the promise that freedom was worth any sacrifice. Captain Nicole Rodriguez commanded the joint patrol fleet that protected the growing alliance of free worlds. Her ships carried crews from dozens of species united by the human concept that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. The galaxy was changing as word spread of the human victory over the harvesters. Oppressed species throughout the stars began to hope and resist, knowing that somewhere among the distant suns was a world of Deathworlders who would come to their aid. The transformation was not limited to biological species, even some machine intelligences began to question their programming as human concepts of freedom and choice spread through digital networks across the galaxy. The final scene took place in the communication center on Earth, where Dr. Amanda Foster received a new transmission. From the far edge of the galaxy, another species was calling for help. Another impossible distance separated them from rescue, and another chance arose for humanity to prove that being from a death world meant never giving up on hope. Amanda smiled as she typed her response into the quantum transmitter, knowing that somewhere among the stars, another desperate species would soon learn what it meant to have humans as allies. Message received, she transmitted across the vast emptiness of space. Hold on, the Deathworlders are coming. The story ended as it began with a signal reaching across impossible distances, but now the message carried hope instead of despair. Humanity had become the galaxy's reluctant guardians, proving that sometimes the most dangerous predators make the most loyal friends. Earth's children had taken their place among the stars, not as conquerors but as protectors, carrying with them the simple truth that had made them legendary across the galaxy. When someone needed help, you helped them, and when someone was in danger, you protected them regardless of the cost.